Have you ever wondered why some people remain stuck for years, not because they lack effort, but because they cannot truly imagine themselves living the life they claim to want? This is where the deepest barrier begins. Not in the world outside you, not in the economy, not in luck. It begins in the private theater of the mind, where every future is first accepted or rejected. Most people believe desire is enough. They think wanting something intensely should be sufficient to move reality in their direction. But desire alone does not transform a life. Desire can beg. Desire can ache. Desire can dream. Yet if the inner image remains small, fractured, or absent, the external result tends to remain out of reach. The mind does not move powerfully toward what it merely wishes for. It moves toward what it can internally recognize as real. That is the distinction that changes everything. If you say you want abundance, but cannot see yourself holding it, managing it, inhabiting it, and feeling safe within it, then part of your consciousness is still rejecting the very reality you're trying to create. And this rejection is often subtle. It hides beneath logic. It speaks through phrases like, maybe one day, that would be nice, or people like me do not live that way. But what if those thoughts are not innocent? What if they're instructions? What if your life is not only responding to your actions, but also to the limits of what your inner world permits? This is why imagination is not fantasy. It is not childish escape. It is the doorway through which a new identity enters. And if you cannot see the life, how can you ever become the person who naturally lives it? Why is it that two people can stand in front of a same opportunity, yet only one of them truly sees it? This question reveals something profound about the way reality operates. Opportunities do not appear only when circumstances change. Very often, they appear when perception changes. When the mind cannot imagine a certain level of life, it unconsciously filters out the signals that could lead to it. Think about this for a moment. Imagine someone who dreams of owning a luxury car, building a successful business, or living in a remarkable home. They may say they want it. They may even work hard for it. But if you ask them a simple question, can you clearly see yourself living that reality today? Many people hesitate. Their mind becomes blank. The image feels distant, unrealistic, almost uncomfortable. That hesitation is not harmless. It reveals a hidden boundary. The human brain constantly filters reality. Every second, millions of pieces of information pass through your senses, but your mind only allows a tiny fraction to reach your awareness. And what determines that filter? Your internal model of what is possible for you. If your internal identity says, that level of life is not for someone like me, then your perception quietly closes the door. The opportunity may still exist in the world, but it becomes invisible to you. This is why two people can walk through the same city, attend the same events, meet the same people, and yet build completely different lives. One person's mind is tuned to scarcity and limitation. The other has trained their imagination to accept expansion as normal. And when the mind accepts something as normal, it begins to notice paths that previously seemed non-existent. So the real question becomes this. If your mind is filtering reality every moment, what possibilities might already be around you that you simply cannot see yet? If this perspective is already shifting the way you see your own potential, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like this video. It helps this message reach more people who are ready to expand their reality. What if the limits you believe are protecting you are actually the very walls keeping your life small? Most people are not consciously deciding to live within narrow possibilities. Yet every day they reinforce invisible boundaries through a simple habit. They measure the future using the conditions of the present. Consider something very ordinary. Imagine you open a real estate website to search for a home. What is the first thing most people do? They immediately apply a price filter. Not based on the life they truly desire, but based on what they believe they can afford today. In a matter of seconds, the mind quietly eliminates hundreds, sometimes thousands, of possibilities. And the person does not even notice it. This small action reveals a powerful psychological mechanism. The mind is constantly protecting its internal model of reality. Anything that appears too far outside that model is automatically dismissed as unrealistic, irresponsible, or impossible. But here is the deeper question. What if those filters are not protecting you but programming you? Every time you reduce the range of what you allow yourself to imagine, you reinforce a message to the subconscious mind. This is the maximum life available to me. Over time, this message becomes a silent rule. The mind begins to shape behavior, decisions, and expectations around that rule. Opportunities that exceed the internal limits start to feel uncomfortable. Larger environments feel intimidating. New financial possibilities trigger doubt rather than curiosity. This is how invisible ceilings are formed, not by external barriers, but by repeated internal permissions about what is reasonable for your life. But what if the filter could be removed? What if, just for a moment, you allowed yourself to explore possibilities without immediately asking whether they are currently affordable, logical, or expected? Would your mind resist it? Or would something inside you begin to awaken to a much larger field of potential? Have you ever asked yourself when these invisible limits were first installed in your mind? Because the truth is, most of them did not originate in adulthood. They were quietly formed long before you ever earned your first salary, made your first investment, or chose your first career path. They began in childhood. A child enters the world with a mind that is extraordinarily open. In those early years, the brain absorbs information with almost no critical filter. Every sentence heard, every emotional reaction observed, every repeated message from parents, teachers, and the surrounding environment becomes part of an internal blueprint about how life works. If a child repeatedly hears phrases like, "Money is hard to earn," or "people like us must be satisfied with little," those words do not remain simple comments. They become instructions stored deep in the subconscious. The mind records them as rules about reality. And because these beliefs are installed so early, they feel natural later in life. They do not appear as external ideas that can be questioned. They appear as personal truths. This is why many people unknowingly carry scarcity patterns even when they consciously desire prosperity. Part of the mind is trying to move forward, but another part is quietly enforcing old commands that were absorbed decades earlier. The result is a strange internal conflict. A person may pursue opportunity, yet feel discomfort when success approaches. They may desire expansion, yet unconsciously return to familiar limits. They may work harder and harder, but never quite move beyond a certain level. From the outside, it can look like bad luck or a lack of discipline. But in many cases, it is simply old programming still running in the background. And here is the deeper question. If many of the rules shaping your life were installed before you were even aware of them, how many of them truly belong to you today? What if your mind is not just a place where thoughts happen, but a receiver constantly tuning into the reality you experience? To understand this, imagine an old radio. The device itself does not create the music you hear. The songs already exist in the air as invisible electromagnetic signals. The radio simply tunes to a frequency and translates that signal into sound. Your mind works in a surprisingly similar way. Every thought you repeat, every belief you hold, every emotional pattern you sustain creates a kind of internal frequency. This frequency becomes the filter through which you interpret events, recognize opportunities, and respond to the world around you. From the perspective of universal laws, reality does not only respond to what you say you want, it responds to the dominant signal you are consistently broadcasting. If someone constantly thinks in terms of scarcity, danger, or limitation, their internal receiver becomes tuned to those patterns. They will naturally notice problems faster than opportunities. They will expect obstacles more than breakthroughs. And because expectation shapes behavior, those patterns often become self-reinforcing. But when the internal frequency begins to change, perception changes with it. New ideas start to appear where there once seemed to be dead ends. Conversations lead to possibilities that previously went unnoticed. A chance meeting suddenly becomes meaningful. What once looked like coincidence begins to feel more like alignment. This does not mean reality magically rearranges itself overnight. But it does mean that your mind starts interacting with the world from a different signal. And that shift can alter everything. Because when your internal frequency changes, the same world begins to reveal completely different pathways. So here is the deeper reflection. If your mind is constantly tuning itself like a receiver, what signal has it been broadcasting most of your life? And is that the signal you truly want shaping your future? If reality responds to internal frequency, then why do different people produce such dramatically different results while living in the same world? At first glance, it may appear that some people are simply more fortunate, more talented, or somehow favored by circumstances. But when we look deeper through the lens of universal laws, another explanation begins to emerge. Just as radio stations broadcast completely different programs on different frequencies, human lives unfold through different mental and emotional patterns. One frequency carries fear, hesitation, and scarcity. Another carries curiosity, expansion, and possibility. Both signals exist simultaneously, yet they lead to very different experiences of reality. This does not mean one person is inherently better than another. Frequency is not a moral ranking. It is a state. Think of it like temperature. Water can exist as ice, liquid, or vapor depending on the level of energy present. The substance itself does not change, but its behavior and potential change dramatically depending on the conditions. Human consciousness operates in a similar way. When someone's internal state is dominated by fear, doubt, and limitation, their decisions tend to contract. They avoid risks, dismiss possibilities, and gravitate toward familiar environments that reinforce what they already believe. But when the internal state begins to shift toward curiosity, openness, and belief in possibility, the behavior changes. The same person may begin exploring new environments, engaging with different people, and recognizing paths that once seemed inaccessible. This is why two individuals can start from similar circumstances, yet end up in completely different places. Their lives are not simply responding to external events. They are responding to the internal frequency guiding their perception and choices. And once you understand this, an important realization appears. Changing your frequency is not about pretending to be someone else. It is about consciously choosing the internal state from which your life will unfold. If your internal frequency shapes what you perceive and pursue, then another question becomes unavoidable. What shapes that frequency in the first place? Many people assume the answer is willpower. They believe that if they simply think positively or repeat affirmations, their internal state will transform. But human psychology is far more complex than that. One of the most powerful forces shaping your mental and emotional frequency is the environment you inhabit every day. Think about it carefully. Your environment is not only the physical place where you live. It includes the people you interact with, the conversations you hear, the expectations that surround you, and even the emotional atmosphere of the spaces you occupy. These elements constantly reinforce certain ideas about what is normal. If someone grows up in an environment where financial struggle is discussed as an unavoidable reality, the mind absorbs that message repeatedly. Over time, scarcity stops feeling like a temporary condition and starts feeling like the natural order of life. On the other hand, when someone enters an environment where growth, opportunity, and creativity are part of everyday conversation, the internal reference point begins to shift. What once seemed extraordinary starts to feel attainable. This is why the same person can behave very differently depending on the environment they are placed in. A restrictive environment compresses imagination. It quietly tells the mind what is realistic. But an expansive environment stimulates curiosity and invites new possibilities. And here is where the deeper principle appears. Environment does not just influence behavior. It stabilizes frequency. If your surroundings constantly reinforce limitation, maintaining an expansive mindset becomes difficult. But when your environment supports growth, new beliefs begin to feel natural rather than forced. So the real question becomes this: are the environments you occupy reinforcing the life you want to create, or quietly anchoring you to the life you already know? If environment is so powerful, then what truly determines the direction of a person's life? Is it talent? Is it luck? Is it intelligence? Or could it be something more fundamental? The interaction between two forces that quietly shape every decision you make, your mindset and your environment? These two elements form a dynamic system. They do not operate independently. They continuously influence each other, reinforcing patterns that can either expand your life or keep it confined within familiar limits. Your mindset determines how you interpret reality. It shapes what you believe is possible, what risks you are willing to take, and how you respond when opportunities appear. But your environment constantly feeds that mindset with signals about what is normal, acceptable, or expected. When both forces reinforce limitation, the result is predictable. Imagine someone who internally believes that wealth is rare, success is reserved for others, and stability is safer than exploration. If that person is also surrounded by an environment where everyone shares the same assumptions, the belief system becomes extremely stable. Nothing challenges it. The mind receives confirmation every day. But when even one of these elements begins to shift, something interesting happens. If a person with limited beliefs suddenly enters an environment where people regularly discuss innovation, growth, and ambitious projects, their internal assumptions start to encounter friction. At first, the mind may resist. It may dismiss those realities as exceptions or coincidences. Yet over time, repeated exposure begins to soften old boundaries. The reverse is also true. Someone with a powerful mindset placed in a limiting environment may gradually feel their vision shrinking if they remain there long enough. This is why transformation rarely happens through mindset alone. Real change occurs when mindset and environment begin to align in the direction of expansion. When both forces start pointing toward a larger reality, the momentum of life itself begins to shift. What if the first step toward transforming your life does not begin with action, but with a different way of imagining reality? Most people approach change by trying to force new behaviors. They set goals, create plans, and push themselves to work harder. Yet many discover that despite effort, the results remain strangely similar. The reason often lies beneath the surface. The mind tends to recreate what it already recognizes as familiar. If the internal image of your life remains limited, your actions often unconsciously return you to the same patterns. This is why many individuals achieve temporary progress only to find themselves back in the same circumstances months or years later. But there is another approach, one that works at the level where possibility is first accepted. It begins with imagination, not the vague kind of daydreaming that drifts through the mind for a moment and disappears, but deliberate visualization that engages the senses and emotions. When you imagine a desired reality as if it already exists, something remarkable happens inside the brain. Neuroscience shows that the brain does not sharply distinguish between vividly imagined experiences and real ones. When you repeatedly visualize a situation with emotional detail, the neural pathways associated with that reality begin to activate. In other words, the mind starts rehearsing the future. You see yourself in the environment. You feel the emotional state associated with it. You experience the decisions and interactions that would naturally belong to that life. Over time, this process sends a new message to the subconscious. This reality is not foreign anymore. And once the mind accepts something as familiar, resistance begins to dissolve. What once felt impossible gradually starts to feel achievable. So the deeper question becomes this: if your brain can be trained to recognize a new reality through imagination, how different might your future become if you practice seeing yourself already living it? But what happens after the mind begins to imagine a larger reality? Is visualization alone enough to transform a life? Many people stop at imagination, believing that if they simply think about their desired future often enough, the world will eventually rearrange itself. Yet imagination becomes far more powerful when it is combined with something equally important: physical exposure. Think about how the brain learns. A child does not understand the concept of the ocean by reading about it alone. The moment they stand on the shore, feel the wind, hear the waves, and see the horizon stretching endlessly in front of them, the experience becomes real in a completely different way. The same principle applies to the life you want to create. When you physically enter environments connected to your desired future, the mind receives powerful new signals. The spaces that once felt distant or intimidating begin to feel familiar. The people who once seemed unreachable become part of your social landscape. The lifestyle you once viewed as extraordinary starts to feel possible. This is why exposure is so transformative. Walking through neighborhoods that reflect the life you want, attending events where innovative ideas circulate, spending time in spaces where prosperity, creativity, and ambition are normal. These experiences quietly expand the mind's internal map. Suddenly, what once existed only as an abstract dream begins to acquire sensory evidence. The brain starts to update its assumptions. Instead of thinking, that world belongs to other people, the mind begins to recognize, I can exist in this environment too. And once that recognition occurs, something subtle but powerful happens. Your decisions start to change. The people you connect with change. The conversations you participate in change. So consider this carefully. What environments could you begin entering today that would allow your mind to experience the future you are trying to build? Because sometimes the fastest way to expand your reality is simply to walk into it. Have you ever noticed how, once you learn something new, you suddenly start seeing it everywhere? A word you had never heard before appears in conversations, books, and videos. A type of car you never paid attention to suddenly seems to fill the streets. It almost feels as if the world changed overnight. But the world did not change. Your perception did. This phenomenon reveals an essential principle of the mind. Once the brain accepts something as relevant or possible, it begins to highlight it within your field of awareness. Psychologists often relate this to the brain's filtering system, sometimes called the reticular activating system, which decides what information deserves your attention. In simple terms, your mind constantly scans reality for signals that match your internal expectations. If you believe a certain opportunity is impossible, your brain does not waste energy looking for it. But when your perception shifts and the mind accepts that possibility is real, the filter adjusts. Suddenly, you begin noticing pathways that were always present but previously invisible. This is what many traditions describe metaphorically as shifting your frequency. The world itself does not suddenly generate opportunities out of thin air. Instead, your awareness becomes capable of recognizing them. And recognition is the first step toward action. Once the mind sees a possibility clearly, it begins to connect ideas, notice patterns, and interpret situations differently. Conversations that once seemed ordinary begin to contain meaningful clues. Invitations that once felt irrelevant begin to appear valuable. It can feel almost magical, but the mechanism is deeply rooted in how the brain processes information. The moment your mind truly accepts that a new reality is possible, your internal filter begins to search for evidence supporting that reality. And when perception changes, the landscape of opportunity expands in ways that once seemed impossible to imagine. If perception determines what opportunities you notice, then another question naturally emerges. Where do the most powerful opportunities tend to appear? Many people assume opportunities arrive randomly, as if they were scattered equally across the world. But in reality, opportunities are rarely distributed by chance. They tend to concentrate in specific environments. Think about how innovation happens. Certain cities become centers for technology. Certain communities become hubs for entrepreneurship. Certain professional circles continuously generate partnerships, ideas, and investments. It is not because opportunity magically prefers those locations. It is because those environments gather people who are already operating at a certain level of vision and action. In other words, the environment becomes a multiplier. When you enter a space where ambitious projects, creative thinking, and collaboration are normal, something subtle begins to happen. Conversations revolve around possibilities rather than limitations. Problems are approached as challenges to solve, not obstacles to avoid. Your mind begins to absorb a new standard of what is possible. This is why many successful individuals intentionally place themselves in environments that reflect the future they want to build. They attend conferences where innovative ideas circulate. They join communities where people are actively pursuing growth. They position themselves in spaces where opportunity flows naturally through interaction. The key insight is simple but powerful. Access to opportunity often begins with access to environment. Before someone receives a breakthrough, they frequently gain proximity to the people, conversations, and experiences that generate those breakthroughs. Once proximity exists, the possibilities expand rapidly. New collaborations emerge. New ideas take shape. New doors begin to open. So consider this carefully. If the environments you enter determine the conversations you hear and the people you meet, how might your life change if you deliberately placed yourself in spaces where the future you desire is already unfolding? Do you think these principles apply only to money and career, or could they be influencing every dimension of your life without you realizing it? Most people first encounter ideas about mindset, frequency, or environment through discussions about financial success. Wealth is visible. It is measurable. It provides a concrete example of how internal beliefs and external circumstances interact. But the same mechanisms extend far beyond financial prosperity. The patterns we have been exploring, imagination, perception, environment, and internal frequency, shape every domain of human experience. Relationships, emotional well-being, health, creativity, and even spiritual development follow similar dynamics. Consider relationships. If someone carries a deep belief that trust is dangerous or that love eventually leads to disappointment, their mind begins filtering interactions through that expectation. They may unknowingly avoid certain people, misinterpret signals of care, or gravitate toward dynamics that reinforce what they already believe. The result often confirms the original belief. The same is true with emotional states. A person who repeatedly tells themselves that life is stressful and unpredictable tends to perceive challenges everywhere. Meanwhile, someone who expects growth and learning begins to interpret difficulties as temporary stages rather than permanent barriers. Even health behaviors are influenced by internal models of possibility. People who see vitality as a natural part of life are more likely to adopt habits that support it. Those who unconsciously believe decline is inevitable often reinforce patterns that accelerate it. In each case, the same principle appears. Perception guides behavior, and behavior shapes outcomes. Once you recognize this, a powerful realization emerges. The internal patterns you cultivate today are quietly shaping not only your financial future, but also the quality of your relationships, the tone of your emotional life, and the direction of your personal evolution. So the real question becomes this: if the same mechanisms influence every area of life, what reality are your current beliefs and environments preparing you to experience? Why does money so often become the center of conversations about mindset, manifestation, and personal transformation? At first glance, it might seem as if financial prosperity is the ultimate measure of success. Entire industries are built around the promise of attracting wealth, multiplying income, or achieving financial freedom. But if we look deeper, money appears in these discussions for a much more fundamental reason. Money touches the most basic layers of human survival. Throughout history, access to resources has determined whether individuals could secure food, shelter, safety, and stability. Because of this, financial security naturally becomes connected to the deepest parts of the human nervous system. It influences our sense of safety, our perception of the future, and even our capacity to make calm, strategic decisions. When the mind feels financially threatened, it tends to enter a state of contraction. In this state, creativity narrows, risk tolerance decreases, long-term vision becomes difficult. The brain shifts into a protective mode focused primarily on immediate survival. This is not a personal flaw. It is a biological response shaped by thousands of years of human evolution. But when financial stability begins to grow, something remarkable happens. The nervous system relaxes. The mind becomes capable of imagining further horizons. People start exploring ideas, building projects, forming partnerships, and investing in long-term goals. In other words, prosperity expands the psychological space available for growth. This is why financial well-being is often discussed in connection with universal laws and personal transformation. Not because money represents spiritual superiority or moral virtue, but because it supports the foundation upon which many other aspects of life can flourish. Once basic security is established, individuals often gain the freedom to explore deeper questions about purpose, creativity, contribution, and meaning. So the real insight is this: money itself is not the final destination. It is one of the conditions that can create the stability needed for human potential to fully unfold. If financial prosperity expands life possibilities, does that mean wealthy people operate on a higher spiritual vibration than everyone else? This idea appears frequently in modern discussions about manifestation and universal laws. Some teachings suggest that those who achieve financial success must somehow be more evolved, more conscious, or more spiritually aligned than others. But this assumption deserves careful examination. Prosperity does not automatically indicate spiritual elevation. It often reflects patterns of belief, patterns of environment, patterns of behavior, and patterns of opportunity. These patterns can lead to financial success without necessarily transforming every other dimension of a person's character. History offers many examples of individuals who accumulated extraordinary wealth while still struggling with emotional imbalance, conflict, or inner dissatisfaction. At the same time, there are people living modest financial lives who demonstrate extraordinary wisdom, compassion, and clarity. So, financial prosperity should not be interpreted as a moral ranking. Instead, it reflects a specific configuration of internal and external conditions. When beliefs about possibility expand, when environments provide access to opportunity, and when actions align with those conditions, financial results often follow. But spiritual development and financial development do not always progress at the same pace. One concerns material interaction with the world, building systems, recognizing opportunities, managing resources. The other concerns inner awareness, understanding oneself, cultivating compassion, and exploring deeper dimensions of meaning. Sometimes these two paths intersect beautifully. Sometimes they evolve independently. Recognizing this distinction protects us from two common misunderstandings. The first is the belief that wealth automatically makes someone wiser. The second is the belief that pursuing prosperity somehow diminishes spiritual integrity. Both ideas are incomplete. The deeper truth is that prosperity reflects alignment with certain principles of possibility and environment, not a measure of a person's spiritual worth or human value. If all these mechanisms shape the direction of our lives, then why do so many people still struggle to change their reality? Why do individuals continue repeating the same patterns, even after learning powerful ideas about mindset, environment, and opportunity? The answer often lies in something surprisingly simple. Most people intellectually understand the concept of change, but they never fully accept the reality of it within themselves. At the heart of everything we have explored so far is a single principle. The mind must first accept a new reality as possible before life begins to reorganize around it. Yet this is exactly where many people encounter resistance. When someone imagines a life far beyond their current experience, the mind frequently reacts with skepticism. A quiet voice appears inside the head. That sounds nice, but it's unrealistic. People like me don't live that way. Maybe someday, but not now. These thoughts may seem harmless, but they reveal a deeper psychological defense. The mind is trying to protect its existing identity. It prefers the familiar, even if the familiar includes limitation. This is why the simplicity of imagination is often rejected. The idea of picturing a desired life as if it already exists sounds too easy. The logical mind wants complex strategies, long explanations, and technical systems. It feels safer believing that change requires complicated steps. But universal laws often operate through elegant simplicity. When you consistently imagine a reality with emotional conviction, your internal model begins to shift. Your nervous system gradually becomes comfortable with a future that once felt distant. And once comfort replaces disbelief, the mind stops resisting. Suddenly, The same idea that once seemed unrealistic begins to feel natural. So the deeper question becomes this: if the mind resists what feels unfamiliar, are you willing to repeatedly imagine the life you want until it finally feels like part of who you are? Have you ever noticed how some people seem to move closer to opportunity, only to suddenly pull away from it? At first, everything appears aligned. A promising connection appears. A new project begins to grow. A door opens that could lead to an entirely different level of life. Yet just as momentum begins to build, something unexpected happens. The person hesitates. They delay a decision. They question their readiness. They convince themselves that the timing is not right. And slowly the opportunity fades. From the outside, it can look like coincidence or bad luck. But in many cases, a deeper psychological mechanism is at work. Self-sabotage. When an opportunity conflicts with the internal identity a person has carried for years, the subconscious mind can interpret it as a threat. Even if the opportunity is positive, it challenges the familiar boundaries of what the person believes they deserve, can manage, or can safely maintain. And the subconscious mind values familiarity more than success. If someone has spent decades believing that prosperity is unstable, that recognition invites criticism, or that wealth leads to conflict, then the arrival of a large opportunity can trigger hidden discomfort. The mind begins searching for reasons to withdraw. It might appear as perfectionism, hesitation, or endless preparation. The person tells themselves they are simply being careful or responsible. But beneath those explanations, an older belief may still be operating. A belief that says, "This level of life is not meant for me." This is what many traditions describe as the shadow, the collection of hidden assumptions and emotional patterns that quietly influence our behavior. Until those patterns are recognized, they can continue steering decisions from behind the scenes. So here is the crucial reflection. When opportunity appears in your life, are you moving toward it, or is some unseen part of your mind quietly trying to protect you from it? If imagination opens the door, environment expands perception, and hidden beliefs sometimes create resistance, then what actually produces real transformation in a person's life? Is it enough to change the way you think? Is it enough to place yourself in new environments? Or is something deeper required for lasting change? The truth is that meaningful transformation rarely comes from a single factor. It emerges when three elements begin working together in alignment: mindset, environment, and access. First comes mindset. This is where the shift begins. The mind must allow a new internal image of reality to exist. Without this mental opening, every external opportunity will feel foreign or unrealistic. A person may see success around them but remain emotionally disconnected from it, as if it belongs to another world. But mindset alone is not enough. The second element is environment. Once the mind begins to imagine a larger possibility, it must be reinforced by exposure to spaces where that possibility already exists. When you enter environments where growth, innovation, and opportunity are normal, the brain receives confirmation that the imagined future is real and accessible. This reinforcement stabilizes the new internal frequency. Then comes the third element: access. Access means recognizing and acting on opportunities when they appear. Many individuals encounter moments that could transform their lives, but hesitation, doubt, or lack of preparation causes them to miss those openings. When mindset expands, environment supports it, and access is recognized with confidence, a powerful alignment occurs. At that point, change stops feeling forced. Instead, life begins to flow in a different direction. Decisions become clearer. Connections form more naturally. Opportunities appear less like rare accidents and more like logical next steps. And that is when transformation truly begins to accelerate. What happens when mindset, environment, and opportunity finally begin to align? Something subtle yet powerful starts to emerge, a quality that many people describe as personal magnetism. Have you ever met someone whose presence seems to attract opportunities, conversations, and connections almost effortlessly? It can appear mysterious from the outside, as if luck constantly favors them. But when we examine this phenomenon carefully, it often follows a recognizable pattern. When a person's internal beliefs accept a larger reality, their behavior naturally begins to reflect that expectation. They speak differently. They carry themselves with greater certainty. They ask questions that others might hesitate to ask. This shift in behavior sends signals to the people around them. Confidence invites engagement. Clarity attracts collaboration. Curiosity opens doors to new ideas. In other words, the internal state begins to influence the social and professional dynamics surrounding that person. At the same time, the environments they occupy begin reinforcing that expansion. They interact with individuals who are building projects, exploring possibilities, and exchanging opportunities. Conversations evolve beyond survival concerns and move toward innovation, strategy, and creation. And then a fascinating cycle begins. Because the person now believes in broader possibilities, they are more willing to step into unfamiliar situations. Those situations generate new connections. Those connections reveal opportunities. Each opportunity reinforces the original belief that expansion is possible. Momentum builds. What once seemed extraordinary becomes normal. What once felt intimidating becomes part of everyday life. From the outside, observers may describe this process as attraction, manifestation, or synchronicity. But in many cases, it is simply the natural consequence of alignment. When your inner state, your environment, and your actions begin pointing in the same direction, life itself starts responding with a new level of coherence. If alignment creates personal magnetism, then what is the real source of prosperity? Is it talent? Is it discipline? Is it luck appearing at the right moment? Those factors can certainly play a role, but beneath them lies something even more fundamental: the gradual reprogramming of belief and perception. Prosperity rarely appears suddenly in a life that has been mentally organized around limitation. Before external conditions change, internal assumptions must begin to expand. A person must first question the invisible rules they have been living by. Perhaps the belief that money is always scarce. Perhaps the idea that opportunity belongs only to certain people. Perhaps the quiet assumption that success inevitably leads to stress or conflict. These beliefs often operate silently in the background, shaping decisions without being consciously examined. Reprogramming begins when those patterns are brought into awareness. Instead of accepting them as fixed truths, the individual begins observing them as mental programs that can be replaced. Through repeated visualization, exposure to new environments, and deliberate changes in behavior, the mind gradually builds a new internal model of reality. Possibility begins to feel normal rather than distant. At the same time, perception expands. The person starts noticing resources, connections, and ideas that once seemed irrelevant or invisible. Conversations take on new meaning. Opportunities that once appeared intimidating begin to look accessible. Prosperity, in this sense, is not only the result of effort. It is the result of expanded perception combined with aligned action. When beliefs shift, perception widens. When perception widens, opportunities appear. When opportunities are recognized and acted upon, new results naturally follow. And once those results arrive, they reinforce the new belief that expansion is possible. This is how prosperity gradually becomes part of a person's lived reality. So after exploring all of this, imagination, mental frequency, environment, perception, belief, and opportunity, what is the simplest truth that remains? What if the life you experience tomorrow is quietly being shaped by the limits or possibilities you allow yourself to see today? This is where everything converges. Your imagination defines the horizon of what feels possible. Your beliefs determine whether that horizon feels reachable or distant. Your environment either reinforces expansion or quietly pulls you back toward familiar limits. And your actions, guided by perception, determine whether opportunities are recognized or ignored. These forces are constantly interacting. Every day, your mind is sending signals about what level of life feels natural for you. Those signals influence the environments you enter, the conversations you participate in, the risks you consider acceptable, and the opportunities you feel prepared to accept. Over time, those small decisions accumulate. A slightly larger vision leads to a slightly different environment. That environment introduces new ideas and connections. Those connections reveal opportunities that once seemed invisible. Each step reinforces the belief that expansion is not only possible, but natural. And gradually, the life that once existed only in imagination begins to take form in reality. This is the quiet architecture of personal transformation. Not a single dramatic moment, but a progressive alignment between the inner world and the outer one. The moment imagination expands, perception shifts. The moment perception shifts, new environments become accessible. The moment those environments open, opportunity begins to circulate. And that is the deeper invitation hidden within these principles. If the boundaries of your life are shaped by what your mind accepts as possible, then the question is no longer whether reality can change. The real question is whether you are ready to expand the way you see yourself within it. If this message expanded the way you see your own possibilities, make sure to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Share it with someone who is ready to break invisible limits and step into a larger reality. And remember, the life you begin to imagine consistently is often the life you begin to create.